Now, fairly recently, Cheerful Pessimist started to cover a few people's sort of gambling experiences with them. And going back well before that, when On a Bucket had his first channel, he covered some of his own. And I kind of thought like now was probably a reasonable time for me to, I guess, share some of my journey. It's just something I've never really covered, and I kind of think it's, say, maybe a benefit to a few people. Like 10 or 20 people might enjoy it. I'm sure there'll be a couple of clowns who don't, but sod 'em. Not really that asked if people get something from this video, and obviously me talking through it, because it's something a bit different to me playing fruit machines or whatever else. But I'm going to cover off some of the journey. How I got into fruit machines when I first played one, I guess, and kind of the early story to doing it for a job, doing it for a living, because a lot of people don't believe that you did it. A lot of people don't believe it's possible to have made money out of fruit machines, and hopefully the channel's probably taught people a little bit that, you know, maybe skeptics or people that just don't believe it was possible, and the machine always wins, that actually there was, for a long time, two winners. There was the machines and then there was us. So yeah, I mean, like, first experience of knowing a fruit machine could be beaten, I think that's probably the best starting point. So I was originally from like Lincolnshire area, and we went back to see family who lived over there an awful lot. My mum and dad took me out. I reckon I'd been 9 or 10 year old. I couldn't even tell you where the pub is. Somewhere near the Humber Bridge. That's all I can really remember. It was somewhere near the Humber Bridge, and I can still sort of picture the pub, and I think that's like part of my weird memory, my weird brain, I suppose, that I can sort of picture the layout of the pub, or at least where the fruit machines were, because they weren't actually in the pub. And I remember we went there for a drink, maybe even had a bit of food. I don't think we did. I think we probably sat. I think we were sat outside and we had a drink, and it was like a kind of big gardeny type of thing, near looking over the Humber. And I remember to get into the pub, like it had sort of a corridor, like an annex, and I remember you had to turn left to go into the actual pub, and I probably never went into the pub itself because I'd have been, say, 9 or 10 years old. And I remember like there was the corridor, and there was 3 fruit machines in there, and I think there was probably one on 2p a go, and then there was something else, and then there was an original May game Monopoly. And there was 2 guys playing this Monopoly, and I, as a curious kid, was just sort of watching, and they weren't that arsed that I was watching, so I was just a kid. And I literally watched it give like win after win after win. Every press was either a feature or a win. And I knew something was untoward straight away. Like, it just, even as a little kid, I knew that's not what it was meant to be doing. And I watched them. And obviously we emptied the fruit machine. Now, at that time, I didn't know how it was done. I didn't know what was being done, or anything about it. All I knew is that I was watching something behave abnormally, and they were obviously taking loads of money out of it. I remember after they finished, I remember asking my dad for £1 to go and play the 2p one, and then put it in the Monopoly, and obviously didn't get bored and lost my £1. But from that day onwards, I knew fruit machines were beatable. I'd watched one get beaten, and I was just a little kid. You know, obviously years later down the line, learned that it'd been plugged, and that's how they'd done it. And they were literally just plugging on every win, a bit like you saw me do on my club Coronation Street, until I managed to blow the power supply up on it. But yeah, that's what they were doing. They were just flicking the switch off as it was paying out, and it didn't account for the win. Eventually, it just gets happier and happier and happier, and then to bring it back down, you obviously have to take all the wins out of it, and that end of empty fruit machine done. So I guess that's my first experience. I have talked about it in comments, but I've never really talked about it as such. But that was my first experience of a fruit machine getting beaten. Although I didn't, like I said, didn't know how it happened. I just knew it did happen. My first experience of playing a fruit machine, or like fond memory, I guess. When I was young, I'm gonna go down to sort of 3-4 year old. I'd have said I would have been. I reckon 3, because I reckon I was in a buggy or pushchair. We used to go on holiday to Bournemouth, and we used to stay somewhere near the centre of Bournemouth, kind of just up the hill from the pier, where all the hotels were. And my dad in the morning would take me out in the buggy, and he'd walk from Bournemouth Pier to Boscombe Pier. And when he got to Boscombe Pier, he'd have a play on fruit machines, and like half an hour or whatever, and then he'd come back and obviously push me back. But that was like kind of his holiday morning routine: go out for a walk and take me with him. And that was the first time I ever remember pressing a button on a fruit machine or really seeing one. Was I really fascinated in them at the time? Probably not, but maybe a little bit as a kid, flashing lights and all that. And I think that was probably the first time I ever pressed a button on one, if I'm completely honest. And I think the overwhelming memory from sort of them days was when they had the circular kind of orange big buttons on some of the probably electric mechanicals, I'd have thought. First sort of machines I do remember Rat Race. I think that was at least one of them on Bournemouth Pier, and Light and Nudge. My dad liked Light and Nudge, and even he certainly wasn't a player. Absolutely nowhere near a player, but he did try to time to hit 10 nudges on Light and Nudge, because he does like a slow one, doesn't it? And he did try and time 10 nudges off it. I remember watching him try to do it. But yeah, by no means was my old man a player. He's very much recreational. Like played in the local con club and stuff when I was a kid, and just enjoyed bandits. So he didn't, he had a decent job, my dad, and kind of I guess it was his release to have a couple of beers and a bit of a slot. But maybe one day, maybe somewhere down the line, I'll tell you the times I got him barred from places, because some of them are quite funny. Anyway, so yeah, I guess back to the original story. So they're kind of my first memories. And then beyond that, I guess my next sort of jump a few years experience, other than going to seasides, and we didn't. I know it's going to sound like growing up, most kids of my age wouldn't have gone abroad, but my mum and dad now went abroad like 2-3 times a year on holiday, so I didn't really do the kind of Butlins and Haven thing. My dad hated caravans. I think he stayed in one in his life and he hated it. I can even tell you where it was. It was the Haven at Poole in Dorset, and he stayed there once. It wasn't even a Haven then. But yeah, I mean, he absolutely bloody hated them. So that was not, maybe it's just too I don't know, where his thing, or thought he were better than that. I don't know, but he didn't like the caravanning. I love it, but he hated it. So yeah, I mean, I didn't really do all the sort of the kind of Butlinsy stuff and Haven stuff growing up. It just was never a thing for me. It was more day trips to the seaside. I had family in Blackpool area, so I mean, I went to, there was a pub called, I believe it's called Jolly's off the top of my head, on Fleetwood Pier, and I recall it was actually on the pier, the pub, and my dad and my uncle would go for a pint in there, and he'd give me a couple of quid, and I'd go and play the fruit machines, or he'd whatever else. And they're kind of more my experiences, going to piers and going to places, and that was kind of me as a kid, I guess. And yeah, I guess if we skip forward a few years now to kind of me getting to 16, 17 and starting going to the pub, it was more I didn't know a lot, if I'm completely honest. But I did see things that other people didn't see, and I sharked. Like all of my mates, I guess going out when we were 16, 17, didn't have a lot of money. I had like 6 paper rounds or something daft. Um, and that's how I, as a sort of like at that age, that's how I made my money. And I was very much like my Friday and Saturday nights were spent going down the pub with probably a tenner or so. I wouldn't have gone out of a lot, and a tenner would have got you probably what 5 or 6 pints. I don't know. Get you a beer, were expensive beer back then, and yeah, I would generally go out with a tenner, and I would shark the machines all night, wait until people lost while drinking, and jump on the machines and, find a few little shortcuts, get the odd jackpot here and there, and like invincible boards and stuff were just starting to become a thing, and people didn't really know about them, and I kind of just sharked, and I'd make like 40 quid maybe. I'd go home smashed off my tits and have a kebab and throw it up probably, and yeah, go on with 40 quid, and that was pretty much every Friday and Saturday night, and that was kind of me at 16, 17. Then I went to uni, and obviously I continued kind of that trend, but probably went touring around like near Uniland, the pubs a bit more, and learnt a few bits, but it was just a few bits. There was nothing groundbreaking. There was no empties, but I was sort of slowly, consistently turning a profit. And I worked all the way through uni, and I ran a car all the way through uni, and yeah, I just kind of more like ends meet, I guess. And then once I got to the end of sort of my last year of uni, that's when things started to change a bit for me, and I started to find myself like going up to my local services on a night time. Started to pick up a few more little bits and pieces, and just little methods on stuff, and I think I'd had numbering a little bit before that. I can't even remember entirely when I got numbering, but it was during my uni days that I got numbering, and that, I guess, that kind of started to open things up a bit. But it would have all sort of come at the same sort of time. I was kind of before building a network of people within my life who played them. It was more, I got curious, and I was online in the very, very early days of online. And I know Cheerful's covered the CMA. Well, I was never ever part of the CMA at any point. I knew an awful lot of people that were in the CMA, but I wasn't a member. I didn't pay to join, and to be honest with you, much of that information, that was within that had come to me anyway, and a lot of it was, even at the time, pretty old hat. Do you know what I mean? Like, we were talking about on the buses. Well, I remember a friend of mine from the northeast who came down, who found an emptyable one in Blackpool, and this, like, obviously, it was old hat by this point, and that was the only one I ever got to sort of see do live was that one, and it was in an arcade near the Winter Gardens, and he'd found it and went, yeah, that works, and it absolutely did work. So there were, yeah, I guess we're kind of going a bit too far forward, but yeah, at that point of my life, it was starting to take a hold, and other than the CMA, you had a guy called Jonathan Morris who had a message board, and he sold mobile phones and stuff as well. So yeah, it was like JM Comms or something, I can't remember. And then you had Darren, also known as Stop and Step, who obviously has gone on to do a lot of streaming, who ran Arcadia. And then you had my group, which was called TFMZ, and it was, I guess, a little bit more underground, I suppose. In the fact that there was like a few guides. There was quite a few guides, actually. People used to later on down the line try and sell them on eBay. There was loads of guides, and there was a message board, but really it was more like kind of I use a word front a bit, I don't know, flippantly, I guess, but it was kind of a front for what was going on behind. There was another message board of just the people that were kind of, I guess, our like sort of inner circle. And I met people, physically met people who I ended up, considering friends, really close friends, and some of them, still friends today. I mean, Christ, I don't think I've ever fallen out with, per se, any of them. They've all remained close to me, and um, some of them people I filled a few years of my life, playing fruit machines with. But I'll come to that in a bit. I suppose it's kind of a little bit still sort of down the line, I guess, from where I'm at. But that the group and the message board, and I very flippantly say, well, like Jack Potty used to do meets. I mean, Jack Potty didn't exist in them days, and let me tell you, we were doing it in Blackpool every year. We were also doing it at ATI in London, which is now known as ICE, which was um, the industry showcase every year. And we used to go down to that. I mean, I used to go down as a guest of Empire. I play tested some of their stuff back in the day, through having um, my website. And yeah, I mean, we that's how I kind of built, I guess, my network as such. But in that sort of time, as that was happening, I got my first empty, and it kind of came out of the blue. And like I said, I started traveling. So in my final year of uni, my missus got pregnant, and I ended up moving sort of back home and commuting to uni. And it was more because obviously I had a baby on the way, I guess. So it did start to change things, and I was going out a bit. And I think I took a year out before my final year, and I started to learn slotting, like proper slotting then. To the point where, because I was a student, I blended in a lot of places, but I was traveling and playing numbers, so I was looking for numbering machines, your JPMs and of that era. And I started to make a bit of money. And on a night, I was driving around a few of the services, and it just so happened that one night I went into Charnock Richards, which is near Preston. It's just south of Preston on the M6, and it was more. And I always like to try and say, I don't know. I never considered myself an addict, but there probably was an element of an addict within me, and it's more because my local arcade. I go back to the paper round and stuff like that. I was bobbing into my local arcade, which was literally across the road from the paper shop, and it had things like Crystal Maze, it had an indie, Monopoly 60, um, it had Monte Carlo Bust, a Gambler. God, it had loads of stuff, and that's where I started, taking me paper money. And I know, to be honest with you, I wasn't always losing. Um, there's always been a bit of a shark in me, but yeah, there's probably some addict in there as well. Like I just wanted to play the machines, and yeah, I remember getting like Sets Appeal for the first time on Monopoly 60, and it repeating like 3 times and getting 40 quid. And yeah, I have some good little memories of the arcade. But yeah, go back to Charnock Richard, and I just happened to walk in one night. We're talking 11, half 11 at night, and there's no fucker about at that time of night in a service station. Everyone's just either coming in for a pee, and the only thing that was open in them days was the arcades, the restauranty cafe type thing. They were the only things that were actually open. So I went in one night, and there's a guy sat down playing Gold Strike. Now I'm not really like kind of interested in him. He's just some guy sat. I think he's just dismiss him almost. But he sat at that machine with a chair pulled up, and he's just slotting away. And I ended up walking around playing a couple of other machines, making a few quid here, making a few quid there. And then I walked over. I was playing the machine next to him. I stood like next to him on the machine, and I have a nasty habit of watching what people are doing. I just cannot help it. Not really to kind of shark as such, just more just get bored, and my mind wanders a little bit. And I looked over, and he's got like the bank limit in a £15 Gold Strike, which I think 75 quid at the top of my head. and he had 20 quid's worth of credits in it. And I was like, straight away, I was like, something's up here. Like, that's not normal. And at that point, obviously, Penny had sort of dropped. So I continued to sort of semi-watch him, and it didn't take me long to figure out exactly what he was doing. I genuinely didn't take me long to figure out. He was literally pressing two presses on the bottom level or whatever level he was in, and then he was collecting a win, but I've using his nudges trying to get up a zone, and he was two presses in the next zone, and obviously the goal was to try and get jackpots out of it, and that was pretty much the trick. And I think I covered it many years ago on my channel. I'll try and find a video and actually add it to it in as a clip if I can do. But yeah, that was like, I know exactly what you're doing. And I guess being a bit naive, because I was naive, and I probably would have handled this slightly differently at the time. And to be honest with you, like, the story is actually a good story because it worked out very positively for me, I guess. And I met somebody that's still a friend now, and he's got a YouTube channel, although not connected to Fruit Machines in any way. He may well watch this video at some point because we do still keep in touch, and we have a few mutual friends, and some of mine and his mutual friends comment on videos on the channel. And one of them's a good, very close friend in Magic. So yeah, I mean, anyway, back to the story. So I'm digressing, which I like to do. So the naivety in me, the next week I went back to the same services. Now, Janet Richard had a southbound side and a northbound side, like most services, not all, but most. And the northbound was really small, and the southbound was actually pretty big arcade, and it had like Circus in there and a few other bits that used to get rolled to absolute death in there. And I knew that there was a gold strike on both the northbound and the southbound side, so I was like, right, sack it, I'll go. About a week later, I ventured back up there again and sat on the northbound one. Probably about 8 o'clock at night. It was in the evening. I don't know what the days were kind of my days at that point. I mean, I didn't tend to venture that far in the daytime. I tend to venture more in an evening out. And yeah, I sit down, start playing the machine, and I'm on it for a while, 2 hours maybe. And then at that point, who walks through the door does the same person that I've seen on the other side a week earlier, emptying the one on the other side. So he literally like wanders around for a couple of minutes in there, has no interest in any other machine in there, and then he comes up and he starts talking to me and said like, I've never seen anybody else doing this trick. Like, you know, how long have you been doing it for? I was like, well, here's the thing. Again, maybe a bit of naivety, but like I'm pretty much down the middle with people. I just turned around and said, well, I was here last week and I watched you doing it, and I kind of realised when I saw you at bank limit in a machine and you were still sat rolling it with 20 quid's worth of credits that, you know, this might be a trick, it might be empty. And he was like, yeah, he just chatted on with me, and he was going, oh, what's the biggest let 'em spin you've had, and blah blah blah. This is 25 years ago, and I can still remember the conversation between us. It's scary. But obviously it mattered to me because it was a big deal, and he stayed with me while I emptied it. Sat with me for a while he emptied it, and I think he even offered me the one on the other side, and I was like, nah, mate, you have it. You've got everything I need, and I started doing stuff while he did it, and then that would have, you know, like we didn't. We may have exchanged numbers. I think we did. I'm pretty. Yeah, in fact, we definitely did, because he may have acquired some, and I don't want to be sensitive even now, I guess, but he may have acquired some lists for me of them around the country, because he was in a slightly different part of the industry to me, let's just say, and yeah, I acquired some lists for locations around the UK of gold strikes, which was quite useful to me. So yeah, we did exchange numbers, and over the course of my sort of gambling days, me and him bumped into each other many times. It was kind of the first travelable emptier, and yeah, boy did I travel, because nobody had it at the time. There was literally me and him doing it, and he was only really doing a couple of them in Janet Richard. And you know, I mean, I had a little run at one point from So obviously I live in Manchester, all the way over to sort of, I think, Woolly Edge on the M1 had one. Hartshead Moor had one each side. So I had them there. Charnock had one each side. So that's like 5. And then you've got other stuff. And the problem with it is an empty, because it takes so long. It's not somewhere that you would particularly, you wouldn't want to sit on one for 5-6 hours to empty it in a pub. Like, you'd have to get smashed to do it, or you'd raise some eyebrows, or it'd have to be a big chain pub where they genuinely didn't give a shit and just thought you were losing loads of money. But it probably, for me, it was somewhere we used to sit on them in bookmakers. Willie Hills used to have 250 oppers. We'd sit them on in there, and we had services all over. I mean, Gretna Green had one, so we used to. I mean, I've got friends up sort of. Pete, who has been in one of the videos that we've done, at Bognor. I mean, me and Pete was my playing partner. We slotted together, and yeah, I mean, I would be often up sort of the top end of like Carlisle, Penrith, all that around that area. I'd say once every couple of weeks, I was up there a lot. And yeah, I mean, there's one in Gretna. There's loads in bookies up that way as well. So they became a very good source of profit, even though they could be time consuming. When I first started doing them, I was doing them with my missus, and as I've sort of already touched on, she was pregnant, and she would literally sit there and do a gold strike, regardless of how long it took. And don't get me wrong, they were not always 5-hour machines. You could have them out in less than an hour sometimes if you just caught them right. It's just the only time they were ever an issue is if they'd just been run. And even then, I'd already figured out when refill days were in services, and I'd already figured out where I was going to maximise the profit from them. But I'd used to literally sit her there, because she did them. I mean, the one that I had at home, she legitimately would not look at it. She would not even look at it. She never put a pound in it. She had no interest in it, purely because she'd spent that many hours sat on them, emptying them, that she just wasn't even remotely interested in it being in the house, and didn't want it there particularly. But I ended up selling that to somebody like Stockport area. Don't know where it is now, but yeah, I mean, I had it for a bit. The problem is, once you've kind of done it and talked through it and whatever, it's kind of it just sits there, doesn't it? Like, that's kind of the problem with me in some of the machines sometimes, is that I almost, the home stuff you sort of lose interest in now. Anyway, she'd sit there, do the machine, and I would shark and do all the other bits and pieces. And when somebody who I would suspect might be interested in what I was doing came in, I would, we'd stop. We would genuinely stop. I mean, it happened a couple of times in Woolly Edge, where, I mean, at the time I didn't actually know him, but Ash used to come in from Sheffield with a couple of his mates on a night, and they'd come bouncing into to Woolly Edge, and obviously me and Ash know each other pretty well now, and or certainly did when I was out slotting and that. We even did the odd day together here and there, but at the time didn't know him from Adam, and I pretty much was at the point where if somebody came in who I thought might know or want to know what I was doing, or a threat, we'd literally just pack up and go and sit in a cafe, or get off to the next place and come back later, which we did quite frequently, to be honest with you, just when we didn't want somebody to know that obviously we had something. And it was, it was probably the start of me really seriously getting into machines, and as you'd eventually share a bit of information, good information with each other within your group, and you all start doing similar tricks or the same tricks, but you're not really treading on each other's toes because you're all over the country. And we were all over the country. I used to travel down. I don't know if I even say, but I used to travel down as far as Tunbridge back in them days and do the machines around that area. I was pretty decent around there. But I travelled down as far as there, sort of Sevenoaks, Tunbridge area, even down to the south coast. And this was in my very early 20s, I started travelling literally all over the country. And it kind of just eventually, it just became, I guess, services that, it's very hard to say I was a services player because I was, but it was so easy, and the perception was the complete opposite, and probably still, I guess, is. But service stations presented something to me, even at them very, very early days, of the ability to go and slot for 24 hours and not stop. And once you've got something, and the perception is percentages are low in the services, yep, absolutely. The other perception, though, that people seem to have, and there's a lot of people, is that they're always battered and there's no profit in them. Well, like, if percentages are low, it puts a lot of people off. Number one, unless you're near a services, you're probably not going to go that often. And don't get me wrong, there were regular faces. It's like there was a guy from Knutsford area. We used to see him in the services all the time in Knutsford. He wasn't a particularly good player, nice enough fella, but he was there all the time. He was there loads. There were places where people would go in a lot. South Mims was another one where a lot of people from sort of a Londonish area went to South Mims on a night, but it would living in the daytime because it was getting slotted, and there wasn't digis when we started doing this. So I started doing this because Winter was doing it well before me, and he was doing it. He was very. He may at some point do a video about himself, but he was only going in for specifics. So he'd only entertain the services. He'd only go for a cash attack or something. Now we were indiscriminate. We were doing everything, whatever was there. We were literally doing. We didn't care. It was all profit. And don't get me wrong, there was machines we didn't touch, but anything that we could make money, whether it was a quick pinch or it had, we could see it out for a streak or whatever, we would do. And the reason being is because there wasn't digis, all of the money was going through machines. And I'll share a story. In fact, I will share a story because he does subscribe, of a guy who I don't want to share the whole story because some of it was probably a little bit embarrassing, but he met up with two slotters from London and he was slotting, and they came up, picked him up from where he lives, and ended up that they basically ditched him in Birchanger Green. She's like, is it M11, is it? We ended up, me and my playing partner Pete were out on the road at the time, luckily. And I got a phone call from him saying that he'd basically been abandoned in Birchanger Green. And the reason I'm telling you the story is not because of that story, because it's a completely different story. But whilst he was there, and bearing in mind this machine has an empty, he obviously didn't know, when no one was doing them at the time, because he streaked it 3 times in 24 hours while he was sat waiting for us to make our way across the country, because we were somewhere we would have been, in fact, I'm fairly certain I know where we would have been. We would have been somewhere daft like Exeter services. Bear in mind, one of us lives in Cumbria, top of Cumbria. We used to leave a car in Lancaster services in the petrol station on the southbound for 2-3 days at a time. And we were somewhere around Exeter when I got the phone call and said, is there any chance you could possibly swing by and pick me up from Birchanger Green at some point? And we're like, well, yeah, we can. It's going to cost you a few quid for us to get all the way across the country to come and get you, but we'll do it. We're not going to be there for at least a day, but yeah, we can do it. So we ended up driving from Exeter over to Birchanger Green and the M11, which is like literally the other side of the country, and we obviously will stop at absolutely everywhere en route. We won't go the quick way. We will go and do every services that we can possibly do, which is basically back up the M5 a bit, across the M4, around the 25, and then back up the M11 to there, and various other stops, because we would have had some stuff en route. And anyway, we did that, and he rolled the supercharge, rolled it 3 times in 24 hours in a services on a low percentage. And that tells you everything you need to know about how much money was going through machines in service stations per 24 hours. Because if you do the maths, and Winter will do the maths for you if you want, but he'll tell you that there's a few quid gone through that machine, and because he was sat in that services for 24 hours, he was literally watching everything that was going through those machines, and he made himself quite a few quid while he was sat there, by the way. He made himself quite a few quid while he was sat there. And that's true story, that happened, and like, I'm not sharing names or anything or anything else, because, you know, even though it's a long time ago, bit shitty thing to do to somebody. Don't care what your reasons are, bit shitty. But yeah, we did travel the length of the country, you know, and you know, people will tell you this 100% happened, and he rolled it three times. He rolled it in 24 hours, which is mental. And I think he had the pesos in there as well, and he did do well out of that. But yeah, I mean, the reality is that people believe that service stations aren't great, and they absolutely have low percentages. And if you compare places like this to, you know, like Dave's Arcades, where percentages are high, but the traffic that comes through them knows what they're doing a lot more. And yes, a lot of people recreationally slot, and they'll stay dead for far less time. I grant that entirely. Services back in the day were a pretty sweet deal, especially if you had a trick. Christ, like lock and load. I mean, I had lock and load to myself for quite some time in terms of travelling around the country, and me and Pete refined it, and made that trick our own. And people have seen me play it on my own machine, and you know, I know the machine fairly well, I'd say. We did well out of that trick, and I was travelling as far as Winchester services, because it had 2 on each side. On refill day, I was there literally as they were filling it up. I was sat waiting for them to finish filling it up and doing it, and then I'd have the first one done, and I'd go over the other side and wait for them to fill the other one up, and that's pretty much like how on it we were. We knew exactly what time they did refills at, and we'd be there. He used to like cordon them off, and you'd have buckets on the floor and stuff. But yeah, I mean, we were there specifically for one reason, and one reason only. It was for the refills. And you know, I weren't the first person to be doing that. Just was doing it years before me. It's just weirdly it coincided with him slowing down and stopping was me starting. You know, that was when I got into fruit machines properly, as he was slowing down and things were changing for him, and he was ironically starting to go online. I was it was like the height of my, I guess, era, if you like. And you know, I did it for quite a while. It was certainly not forever, and people have said, "Oh, why did you stop?" And there's loads of reasons, but I'll come to them down the line. I hope you've enjoyed listening to, I guess, the first part of the little journey, the little story, I suppose, of my fruit machine history and how I ended up, I guess, doing a YouTube channel. Anyway, thanks for listening, and hopefully I've filled it in with some nice bits of clips of video and stuff like that. Hopefully there'll be a part 2.